The blood seeping from Rebecca Miller's split lip tasted like pennies in desperation as she crouched behind a stack of empty barrels outside a saloon in Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1876. The distant sound of horses' hooves made her heart stutter in her chest as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying that David wouldn't find her this time. Rebecca pulled the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, wincing as her fingers brushed against the fresh bruises beneath. 6 months of marriage had taught her that her husband's charm was nothing but a mask that concealed a monster. Tonight, when he had returned home drunk and raging, something inside her had finally broken. While he slept off the whiskey, she had grabbed what little money she could find, a change of clothes, and disappeared into the night. The pounding of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She knew David would come after her. A man like him couldn't stand to lose what he considered his property. She peered cautiously around the edge of a barrel, watching as several riders came into view, silhouettes against the dusty main street. The moon slipped from behind a cloud, illuminating the scene. Her heart plummeted when she recognized David's stocky frame among the riders. His face was contorted with rage even from this distance, and the men with him were his loyal drinking companions, the same ones who had looked the other way whenever she appeared in town with new bruises. "Find her." David's voice carried through the still night air. "She can't have gone far. I want my wife back, boys." Rebecca retreated further into the shadows, her mind racing. The next town was at least 20 miles away, far too far to reach on foot. She had hoped to stow away on the morning stage, but now even that plan seemed impossible. She was trapped. The men split up, moving down different streets, calling her name with false concern that made her skin crawl. Rebecca knew she needed to move, but fear had frozen her limbs. Just as she gathered the courage to slip away, rough hands grabbed her from behind. Well. "Look what I found," growled a voice she recognized as Pete, one of David's closest friends. His breath reeked of cheap whiskey as he yanked her to her feet. "David, over here." Rebecca struggled, twisting in his grip. "Let me go? Please, Pete. You know what he'll do to me." Pete's grip tightened painfully on her arm. "Not my concern, Mrs. Miller. A wife belongs with her husband." As David's answering shout came from down the street, Rebecca drove her elbow hard into Pete's stomach. He doubled over with a grunt of surprise, his grip loosening just enough for her to wrench free. She ran blindly, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing that her life depended on these next few moments. The sound of pursuing footsteps echoed behind her as she darted between buildings, searching desperately for anywhere to hide. The livery stable loomed ahead, its large doors standing slightly ajar. Without hesitation, Rebecca slipped inside, the familiar smell of hay and horses enveloping her as she sought refuge in the shadowy interior. "I know you're in there, Rebecca." David's voice rang out, much closer than she'd expected. "You're only making this worse for yourself, girl." Rebecca retreated deeper into the stable, backing into an empty stall. Her hands trembled as she heard the stable doors creak open wider, followed by the heavy tread of boots on packed earth. "Found you," David said, his silhouette appearing at the stall entrance. The moonlight streaming through a high window caught the gleam of metal in his hand, the hunting knife he always carried. "Did you really think you could run from me?" "Please, David," Rebecca whispered, raising her hands as she backed away until her shoulders hit the rough wooden wall. "I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." David's laugh was cold and humorless. "You're my wife. Till death do us part, remember? And I don't plan on dying anytime soon." As he stepped forward, knife raised, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "That's far enough, mister." Both Rebecca and David whirled toward the voice. A tall figure stood at the stall entrance, silhouetted against the dim light. All Rebecca could make out was broad shoulders and the unmistakable shape of a revolver pointed steadily at David. "This doesn't concern you," David snarled. "This is between me and my wife. When a man pulls a knife on a woman in my stable, it becomes my concern," the stranger replied, his voice deep and steady. "Now drop it." For a moment, Rebecca thought David might lunge at the newcomer, but something in the stranger's stance must have convinced him otherwise. With a muttered curse, David let the knife fall to the ground. "Good decision," the stranger said, stepping further into the stall. As he moved into the patch of moonlight, Rebecca could finally see him clearly. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a working cowboy denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a weather-beaten hat pushed back on his head. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear blue and unwaveringly calm despite the tension. "Now, I think the lady doesn't want your company," the cowboy continued, his gun still trained on David. "So why don't you gather your friends and be on your way?" David's face flushed with anger. "She's my wife. Don't much care if she's the Queen of England," the cowboy replied evenly. "No man treats a woman like that. Not here." Rebecca watched the standoff, hardly daring to breathe. She could see David calculating his chances, his eyes darting between the cowboy's gun and the knife on the ground. "This isn't over," David finally spat, directing his words at Rebecca. "You belong to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone," the cowboy stated, his voice hardening. "Now get." With a final venomous glare, David backed away and then turned, stalking out of the stable. The sound of his boots faded, followed by angry voices as he presumably rejoined his companions. Only when the sounds had completely disappeared did the cowboy holster his weapon. He turned to Rebecca, his expression softening as he took in her bruised face and terrified eyes. "You all right, madam?" he asked, keeping his distance as if afraid of frightening her further. Rebecca realized she was trembling uncontrollably, the delayed shock of her narrow escape washing over her. Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He would have killed me." The cowboy nodded grimly. "Men like that usually do, eventually." He paused, then added, "Name's Blake Callahan. This is my livery." "Rebecca Miller," she replied automatically, then winced at giving her married name. "Though I wish I wasn't a Miller anymore." Blake's eyes flickered to the stable entrance. "He'll be back, likely with more men. Cottonwood Springs isn't big enough to hide in for long." The reality of her situation crashed down on Rebecca with crushing weight. David wouldn't stop looking for her. Even if she managed to escape tonight, he would track her down eventually. The bruises on her body throbbed with remembered pain, a stark reminder of what awaited her if he caught her again. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, hating the helplessness in her voice. "I have nowhere to go." Blake studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then he seemed to come to a decision. "I've got a ranch about 15 miles north of here. I was heading back tonight after delivering some horses. You'd be safe there, at least until you figure out your next move." Rebecca stared at him, torn between gratitude and suspicion. In her experience, men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Why would you risk that for a stranger? A shadow passed over Blake's face. "Let's just say I've seen what men like your husband can do. I don't much like standing by and watching it happen again." Something in his tone told Rebecca there was more to his story, but now wasn't the time to press. The offer of temporary safety was too precious to refuse. "Thank you," she said simply. "I accept." Blake nodded. "We need to move fast. Can you ride?" "Yes. My father taught me before." Before she'd made the worst mistake of her life and married David, believing his sweet words and promises. "Good. I'll saddle 2 horses. There's a back way out of town we can take." Blake hesitated, then added, "It won't be easy. Once your husband realizes you've left town, he might try to follow." Rebecca squared her shoulders, ignoring the pain from her bruises. "I'd rather take my chances with the unknown than stay here and face the certain." A ghost of a smile touched Blake's lips. "That's a brave way of looking at it." He moved toward the tack room, pausing to add, "There's a canteen and some hardtack in my saddlebag. Help yourself while I get the horses ready." As Blake disappeared into the shadows of the stable, Rebecca allowed herself a shaky breath. She had no illusions about the danger she was in, or the risk this stranger was taking by helping her. But for the first time since she'd realized the terrible mistake she'd made in marrying David, Rebecca felt something stir inside her chest that felt dangerously like hope. Within minutes, Blake had 2 horses saddled, a sturdy roan for himself and a gentle-looking bay mare for Rebecca. He helped her mount, his hands respectful and impersonal as he adjusted the stirrups for her. "Stay close and follow my lead," he instructed, swinging up onto his own horse. "If there's trouble, the mare knows the way to the ranch. Just give her her head." Rebecca nodded, gathering the reins in trembling hands. "Mr. Callahan? Thank you. I know this puts you at risk too." Blake's expression was hidden beneath the brim of his hat as he turned his horse toward the back entrance of the stable. "Some risks are worth taking, Mrs. Miller. Now let's ride." They slipped out of the stable and into the night, staying to the shadows as they made their way to the edge of town. Rebecca kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see David and his friends in pursuit at any moment. But the streets remained quiet, the town mostly asleep except for the golden glow of the saloon windows. Once they cleared the last buildings, Blake led them off the main trail and into the scrubby wilderness that surrounded Cottonwood Springs. The terrain was rough, but their horses navigated it confidently, picking their way through the darkness with the sure-footedness that came from experience. The night air was cool against Rebecca's face as they rode. The vast Wyoming sky spread above them in a tapestry of stars. Despite her fear and uncertainty, there was something exhilarating about this moment, this escape into the unknown with a stranger who had risked himself to help her. "We'll be at the ranch before dawn," Blake said over his shoulder, his voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. "Try to rest if you can. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Rebecca doubted she could rest, but she nodded anyway, grateful for his concern. As they rode deeper into the wilderness, Cottonwood Springs falling away behind them, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that she might truly escape the prison her marriage had become. The moon sailed high overhead, casting silver light on the rugged landscape as they rode north. And with each mile that passed beneath their horses' hooves, Rebecca felt the weight on her chest lighten, just a little. Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon when Blake finally reined in his horse at the top of a gentle rise. Below them stretched a modest ranch not large by Wyoming standards, but well-maintained, with a sturdy log cabin, a corral, a barn, and several outbuildings. A small creek wound its way across the property, glinting in the early morning light. "Welcome to Callahan Ranch," Blake said, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's home." Rebecca took in the peaceful scene, feeling a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. They had made it safely, but what happened next was uncertain. She was acutely aware that she was putting her trust in a man she had known for only a few hours. As if reading her thoughts, Blake said, "There's a spare room you can use for as long as you need. No strings attached." "Thank you," Rebecca replied, touched by his understanding. "I won't impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." Blake's expression turned serious. "Mrs. Miller, I need you to understand something. Your husband strikes me as the type who doesn't give up easily. Even out here, you may not be entirely safe." Rebecca's hands tightened on the reins. "I know. David is persistent. He sees me as his property." "Well, you're not property," Blake stated firmly. "Not his, not anyone's. And while you're on my land, I'll do everything in my power to make sure he doesn't get near you again." The conviction in his voice warmed something inside Rebecca that had grown cold during her months with David. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this kindness, Mr. Callahan." A slight smile crossed Blake's weathered face. "Let's start by dropping the Mr. Callahan. Just Blake will do fine." He urged his horse forward. "Come on. You look like you could use some rest and a hot meal." They rode down to the ranch, where Blake helped Rebecca dismount before leading both horses to the corral. She stood uncertainly in the yard, her small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest, taking in her surroundings in the growing daylight. The ranch was simple but well kept, with signs of careful stewardship everywhere she looked. Blake returned from settling the horses and led Rebecca to the cabin. Inside, the main room was surprisingly comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with chairs, and a few pieces of sturdy furniture. A cast-iron stove stood in one corner, and shelves lined with books occupied another wall, more books than Rebecca would have expected in a cowboy's home. "The spare room is through there," Blake said, gesturing to a door off the main room. "It's basic, but the bed's comfortable. Bathroom's out back, there's a pump for water in the kitchen here." Rebecca nodded, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. The night's events, the long ride, and the constant fear had drained her completely. "Why don't you get some rest?" Blake suggested gently. "I need to check on the stock anyway. There's fresh water in the pitcher in your room. and I'll have something to eat ready when you wake up." "Thank you," Rebecca said again, feeling like the words were woefully inadequate for what this man had done for her. Blake simply nodded and headed back outside, leaving Rebecca to explore her temporary sanctuary. The spare room was indeed basic: a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a chair by the window, but it was clean and private, a luxury she hadn't expected. She set her bundle on the bed and moved to the window, looking out at the ranch bathed in morning light. In the distance, she could see Blake walking toward the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. A strange man who had risked himself to save her, who had opened his home to her without question. Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past 12 hours finally catching up with her. For the first time since she had fled from David, she allowed herself to cry tears of relief, of fear, and of cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a safe harbor in the storm of her life. When Rebecca awoke, the sun was high in the sky, streaming through the small window of her room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was then. The events of the night before came rushing back. The escape from David, the mysterious cowboy who had intervened, the long ride to this isolated ranch. She sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles from the unaccustomed hours on horseback. The bruises from David's last attack throbbed dully, a reminder of what she had fled. Rebecca pushed herself to her feet and went to the small mirror hanging on the wall, grimacing at her reflection. Her lip was still swollen, a purple bruise bloomed on her cheekbone, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion despite her sleep. After washing her face and hands in the basin provided, Rebecca changed into her one spare dress, a simple blue cotton garment that had seen better days, but at least was clean. She smoothed her dark hair as best she could and took a deep breath before stepping out into the main room of the cabin. Blake was nowhere to be seen, but a covered plate sat on the table with a note beside it. Rebecca picked up the small piece of paper, reading the neat, surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Had to check the north pasture. Help yourself to breakfast. Back by midday." The plate contained biscuits, some cold bacon, and a small jar of preserved simple fare, but to Rebecca, who had barely eaten in the past day, it looked like a feast. She sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring each bite as she considered her situation. The truth was, she had no plan beyond escaping David. She had a little money, not enough to start a new life somewhere else. She had no family to turn to. Her parents had died 2 years ago, which was partly why she had been so vulnerable to David's courtship. No siblings, no close friends who would risk harboring a woman fleeing her husband. What she did have was time to think, to plan, to decide what came next. And for that, she owed Blake Callahan more than she could express. After finishing her meal, Rebecca explored the cabin, curious about the man who had rescued her. The bookshelf revealed eclectic taste. Volumes on ranching and animal husbandry sat alongside classics of literature, history books, and even poetry. Not the collection she would have expected from a Wyoming cowboy. A small desk in one corner held papers and ledgers. Ranch business, she assumed. Above it hung a framed photograph of a younger Blake standing beside an older couple, presumably his parents, and a young woman who shared his eyes. His family, perhaps? The sound of hoofbeats outside alerted Rebecca to Blake's return. She moved away from the desk, not wanting to seem as though she had been prying, and went to the window. Blake dismounted from his roan with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. As he led the horse toward the corral, Rebecca noticed again how he moved with a quiet confidence, his broad shoulders straight despite what must have been a tiring morning's work. The door opened a few minutes later, and Blake entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He seemed momentarily surprised to see Rebecca standing there, as if he had forgotten he had a guest. "You're up," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Rebecca replied truthfully. "Thank you for breakfast." Blake nodded, moving to the kitchen pump to wash his hands. "Good. Figured you needed the rest after last night." He paused, glancing at her. "Your face looks painful." Rebecca touched her bruised cheek self-consciously. "It will heal." A shadow crossed Blake's face. "Not all wounds do." The words seemed to carry more weight than their simple meaning suggested, but before Rebecca could respond, he continued, "I've been thinking about your situation. How long were you married? 6 months, Rebecca answered, the admission bringing a wave of shame. 6 months of enduring David's escalating cruelty, of making excuses, of believing his promises that he would change. It wasn't always like this. Or at least, he hid it well until after the wedding. Blake's expression remained neutral, but his eyes darkened. Men like that are good at hiding their true nature. It's not your fault. The simple statement, delivered without judgment, loosened something tight in Rebecca's chest. Most people wouldn't see it that way. A wife is supposed to stand by her husband, no matter what. Most people haven't seen what a man like that is capable of, Blake replied, his voice holding an edge that made Rebecca wonder again about his past. He seemed to shake off whatever dark thoughts had gripped him and gestured to the table. Sit. We need to talk about what happens next. Rebecca sat, watching as Blake poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the stove before joining her. His movements were efficient and controlled, those of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. I've been thinking about your husband, Blake began, pushing one of the cups toward her. Men like him don't give up easily on what they consider theirs. Even out here, you might not be safe for long. Rebecca wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. You think he'll come looking for me? I think it's likely, Blake confirmed. Cottonwood Springs isn't that big. Someone might have seen us leave together. Word gets around. The thought sent a chill through Rebecca despite the warm coffee. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Perhaps I should move on. Blake shook his head. And go where? With what resources? His direct questions weren't unkind, merely practical. No, running blindly isn't the answer. You need a plan and time to heal. What do you suggest? Rebecca asked, surprised by his investment in her welfare. Blake took a sip of his coffee before answering. Stay here for now. The ranch is isolated enough that we'd see anyone approaching from a good distance. I've got a few hands who work for me, good men who know how to keep their mouths shut and their eyes open. And then what? Rebecca pressed. I can't hide forever. No, Blake agreed. But you can rebuild. Start fresh somewhere your husband won't think to look. He hesitated, then added, I have connections in Colorado. Once things cool down, I could help you get set up there. New name, new start. The offer took Rebecca's breath away. This man, who owed her nothing, was willing to go to such lengths to help her escape David's grasp. Why would you do all this for a stranger? Blake's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Rebecca glimpsed pain behind his calm exterior. Because someone once helped my sister in a similar situation. And because it's the right thing to do. His sister. That explained his understanding, his lack of judgment. What happened to her? Rebecca asked gently. Blake's jaw tightened. She wasn't as lucky as you. She went back to him, believed his promises one too many times. He set his cup down with careful control. She's buried in Laramie. The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Rebecca reached across the table without thinking, placing her hand on Blake's weathered one. I'm so sorry. Blake looked down at their hands, then back at her face. It was 5 years ago. But it's why I couldn't just stand by last night. He withdrew his hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the connection. So you'll stay? At least until we figure out a more permanent solution. Rebecca nodded, knowing she had few options, but also sensing that she could trust this solemn cowboy with the sad eyes. Yes, I'll stay. Good. Blake stood, indicating the conversation was over for now. In that case, there's something I need to show you. He led her to a small cabinet near the fireplace and opened it, revealing a shotgun and a revolver. Can you shoot? Rebecca blinked in surprise. My father taught me to use a rifle for hunting, but it's been years. Blake nodded and took out the revolver. This is simpler. Point and pull the trigger. 6 shots. He checked that it was unloaded before handing it to her. If you're going to stay here, you need to be able to protect yourself if necessary. Rebecca took the weapon gingerly, feeling its weight in her hand. You really think David might come here? I hope not, Blake said grimly. But hope isn't a strategy. Tomorrow, we'll practice out back. For now, just get familiar with holding it. As Rebecca examined the revolver, Blake continued, There's one more thing. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to introduce you to my ranch hands as my cousin from back east. It's a simpler explanation than the truth, and it might prevent awkward questions. Rebecca considered this. Your cousin, she repeated. I suppose that makes sense. What's my story? Rebecca Taylor, widow from Pennsylvania. Come west to start fresh after losing your husband, Blake suggested. Close enough to the truth to be believable, far enough to protect you. The irony of posing as a widow when she was desperately trying to escape her very much alive husband wasn't lost on Rebecca. All right, Rebecca Taylor it is. Blake's expression softened slightly. It won't be forever, just until we can ensure your safety. The way he said we, as if her problems were now shared between them, gave Rebecca a strange feeling of comfort she hadn't expected. Thank you, Blake, for everything. He acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. I need to finish my chores before the hands come in for supper. Make yourself at home. There are books if you want to read, and the kitchen's yours if you feel like cooking. After Blake left, Rebecca stood in the quiet cabin, the revolver still in her hand. 6 months ago, she had been a newlywed, believing she had found happiness with a charming store owner in a growing Wyoming town. Now she was a fugitive, hiding on a remote ranch with a man she barely knew, learning to use a gun in case her husband came to reclaim her. Life had a way of taking unexpected turns, Rebecca reflected as she carefully placed the revolver back in the cabinet. But for the first time since David had shown his true nature, she felt something like peace settle over her. Whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. The next few days established a routine that gave Rebecca an unexpected sense of normalcy. Each morning, she woke early to help prepare breakfast for Blake and his 3 ranch hands, Tom, an older man with a weathered face and quiet manner, Jesse, a young cowboy barely out of his teens with an easy smile, and Hank, a middle-aged former soldier who spoke little but observed everything. Blake had introduced her as planned, and while she caught curious glances from the men, they accepted the story without question. If they noticed her fading bruises, they had the courtesy not to mention them. After breakfast, the men would head out to their various tasks around the ranch, and Rebecca would busy herself with household chores. The work was familiar and comforting, cooking, cleaning, mending, and she found herself taking pride in bringing order to Blake's bachelor home. In the afternoons, true to his word, Blake would take her behind the barn to practice shooting. Under his patient instruction, Rebecca's confidence with the revolver grew, though she prayed she would never need to use it. Keep your arms steady, Blake instructed on the 4th day, standing behind her as she aimed at a row of cans set up on a fallen log. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Rebecca followed his guidance, squeezing slowly until the revolver fired with a crack that still made her flinch despite the practice. One of the cans flew off the log. Good, Blake said, approval warming his voice. You're a quick learner. Rebecca lowered the gun, feeling a mix of pride and discomfort. I never thought I'd need to learn something like this. Blake's expression turned serious. Most of us end up learning things we never expected to need. He hesitated, then added, Rebecca, there's something we need to discuss. The gravity in his tone made her stomach tighten. What is it? Tom rode into town for supplies yesterday. There's talk about you. Blake watched her face carefully as he continued. Your husband has been asking questions, offering rewards for information. Says his wife has been kidnapped. Rebecca's hand tightened on the revolver. Kidnapped, she repeated bitterly. Of course he wouldn't admit I ran from him. No man like that ever admits the truth, Blake agreed. The good news is that no one seems to have connected you to me yet. Tom was careful not to show too much interest in the gossip. But it's only a matter of time, Rebecca concluded, voicing the fear that Blake's expression confirmed. Someone will remember seeing us leave together. Blake nodded grimly. It's possible, which means we need to consider our options sooner rather than later. Rebecca handed the revolver back to him, suddenly feeling the weight of her situation anew. You mentioned Colorado before. I did. I have a friend in Denver who owes me a favor. He could help you get established there, find work. Blake tucked the gun into his belt. But there's something else to consider. What's that? Blake's blue eyes held her steadily. A divorce. Rebecca blinked in surprise. Divorce was uncommon and often scandalous, especially in the territories. Is that even possible? It's not easy, Blake admitted. But with evidence of cruelty, it can be done. Your bruises, witnesses who might have seen your condition, it could be enough. Hope fluttered in Rebecca's chest, quickly followed by fear. David would never agree to it. And appearing in court would mean revealing where I am. Not necessarily, Blake said. My friend in Denver, the one I mentioned, he's a lawyer. If we documented your injuries, gathered statements, he might be able to file papers without you being present. The possibility of legal freedom from David was intoxicating, but Rebecca forced herself to be realistic. Even if that worked, David would still come after me. A piece of paper wouldn't stop him. Blake's expression hardened. No, but it would give you legal protection. And, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. It would mean that if he did find you, and if defending yourself became necessary, the law would be more likely to see it as justified. The implication hung in the air between them. Rebecca thought of the revolver, of the hours spent learning to aim and fire. Blake wasn't just teaching her to protect herself. He was preparing her for a worst-case scenario. I need to think about this, Rebecca said finally. Both options carry risks. Blake nodded. Of course. It's your decision. I just wanted you to know all the possibilities. He gestured toward the cabin. Come on. It's getting late, and you promised the boys a pie for supper. As they walked back, Rebecca studied Blake's profile. In just a few days, this stoic cowboy had become her protector, her teacher, and perhaps her friend. There was a gentleness beneath his reserved exterior that she found increasingly comforting, a stark contrast to David's false charm that had hidden cruelty. Blake, she said suddenly, stopping him with a hand on his arm. Why are you doing all this? The truth. It can't just be because of your sister. Blake looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. Maybe at first it was, he admitted. But now, he seemed to struggle with the words. Now I'm doing it because you deserve better than what life's handed you so far. Because I can't stand the thought of you having to run forever. The simple honesty in his words touched something deep inside Rebecca. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me as someone worth helping. A ghost of a smile touched Blake's lips. You're worth a lot more than just help, Rebecca Taylor. The use of her assumed name reminded her of their charade, of the precarious nature of her situation. But as they continued walking toward the cabin, side by side in the golden afternoon light, Rebecca felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for too long. That evening, as Rebecca served her apple pie to appreciative cowboys around Blake's table, she found herself studying their host when he wasn't looking. Blake ate quietly, contributing to the conversation mainly to redirect Jesse's enthusiastic stories when they became too boisterous, or to ask Hank practical questions about the next day's work. There was a contained quality to Blake Callahan that intrigued her, as if he held himself in check, revealing only what was necessary. Yet when he smiled, rare as it was, the expression transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and bringing warmth to his blue eyes. Miss Rebecca, Jesse said, interrupting her thoughts, this here's the best pie I've had since my mama's, and that's the honest truth. Rebecca smiled at the young cowboy's enthusiasm. Thank you, Jesse. It's nice to have an appreciative audience. We're grateful to have a lady's touch around the place, Tom added with a nod. The boss's cooking was liable to kill us all eventually. Blake raised an eyebrow. You never complained before. Too hungry to risk it, Hank muttered, the rare joke from the taciturn man causing a round of laughter. Rebecca joined in, feeling a surprising sense of belonging among these rough men. For the first time since fleeing David, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, a future where she might find happiness again. Later, after the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse and she and Blake were washing the supper dishes, Rebecca broke the comfortable silence between them. I've been thinking about what you said. About the divorce. She kept her eyes on the plate she was drying. I want to pursue it, even if it means risk. Blake paused in his washing, giving her his full attention. You're sure? Rebecca nodded, setting the plate aside. I don't want to just run and hide. I want to be free of him legally as well as physically. She straightened her shoulders. And I want to stop being afraid. A look of respect crossed Blake's face. It won't be easy. Few worthwhile things are, Rebecca replied, surprising herself with her conviction. When can we contact your lawyer friend? I'll write to him tomorrow, Blake said. In the meantime, we should document your injuries while they're still visible. As evidence, Rebecca's hand went unconsciously to her cheek, where the bruise had faded to a yellowish shadow. How would we do that? There's a photographer in Cottonwood Springs, Blake explained. But going there would be too risky. The next town over, Pine Tree Junction, has one as well. It's a day's ride, but safer. Rebecca considered this. When could we go? Day after tomorrow, Blake decided. I can spare the time, and Hank can oversee things here. He studied her face. Are you sure about this, Rebecca? Once we start down this road, there's no turning back. I'm sure, she said firmly. I've been running and hiding. It's time I stood my ground. Blake nodded slowly, something like admiration in his eyes. All right then. Day after tomorrow, we ride for Pine Tree Junction. As they finished the dishes in companionable silence, Rebecca felt a curious mixture of apprehension and determination. She was taking a step toward reclaiming her life, toward a future free from David's shadow. And though the path ahead was uncertain, she wasn't walking it alone. The thought brought her eyes back to Blake's profile as he dried his hands on a towel. In less than a week, this quiet cowboy had become her anchor in a storm of uncertainty. She told herself it was gratitude she felt, nothing more. But in the flickering lamplight of the cabin, with the evening stretching before them, Rebecca couldn't deny that something deeper was taking root in her heart. The journey to Pine Tree Junction was long, but mercifully uneventful. Blake set a steady pace, mindful of Rebecca's still developing riding skills, and they arrived in the small town by mid-afternoon. Unlike Cottonwood Springs, with its single dusty main street, Pine Tree Junction boasted several streets of businesses and homes, giving it a more established feel. We'll see the photographer first, Blake decided as they rode down the main street. Then find a place to stay for the night. It's too far to make it back to the ranch before dark. Rebecca nodded, her stomach nodding with a mixture of determination and dread. The idea of documenting her abuse, of creating a permanent record of David's cruelty, filled her with conflicting emotions. It was necessary evidence, but also a humiliating reminder of what she had endured. The photographer's studio was a small building with large windows to capture the natural light. A sign in the window advertised portraits and family photographs. Mr. Edward Simmons, photographer. Blake helped Rebecca dismount, his hands lingering supportively at her waist for a moment longer than necessary. Are you ready for this? Rebecca straightened her dress, grateful that she had packed her best one for this trip. As ready as I'll ever be. Inside, the studio was meticulously arranged with painted backdrops, a few elegant chairs, and various props for formal portraits. A thin man with spectacles emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. Good afternoon, he greeted them. Looking for a portrait? Perhaps a memento of your visit to our humble town. Blake stepped forward. Not exactly, Mr. Simmons. We need something different. He glanced at Rebecca, who nodded her permission for him to continue. Mrs. Taylor here needs photographic documentation of injuries inflicted by her husband for legal purposes. The photographer's expression shifted from professional cheerfulness to solemn understanding. I see. He looked at Rebecca with compassionate eyes. This wouldn't be the first time I've assisted in such matters, madam. Rebecca's shoulders relaxed slightly at his matter-of-fact acceptance. Thank you for understanding. Of course. Mr. Simmons gestured to a simple chair positioned before a plain backdrop. If you'll sit here, Mrs. Taylor, we can proceed whenever you're ready. Rebecca moved to the chair, her heart racing. Blake remained nearby, a reassuring presence as Mr. Simmons prepared his equipment. The bruise on your face has faded considerably, the photographer observed professionally. But I can still capture it with the right lighting. Are there other injuries that should be documented? Rebecca swallowed hard. Yes, on my arms and my back. Mr. Simmons nodded without judgment. I understand. Mrs. Carver, he called toward the back room, and moments later an older woman appeared. My wife assists with female subjects, he explained to Rebecca. She can help you in private. Mrs. Carver's kind face and gentle manner put Rebecca at ease as she was led to a small changing room. The woman helped her remove the top portion of her dress, revealing the yellowing bruises on her upper arms and the more severe marks across her shoulders and back, evidence of David's belt. Oh, you poor dear, Mrs. Carver murmured, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding that suggested she had seen such injuries before. No one deserves such treatment. When Rebecca was ready, Mrs. Carver arranged a drape to preserve her modesty while exposing the necessary areas for the photographs. The process was clinical and respectful, with Mr. Simmons directing small adjustments to capture the evidence clearly while maintaining Rebecca's dignity. Throughout it all, Blake waited just outside the photographer's field of view, his presence a silent support that Rebecca found herself increasingly grateful for. When it was finished and Rebecca was fully dressed again, Mr. Simmons spoke quietly with Blake about the photographs. "I can have these ready by tomorrow morning," he explained. "I'll mount them properly for legal purposes, with dates and my signature as witness." Blake nodded, paying the man from a leather wallet. "We'll return in the morning, then." As they left the studio, Rebecca felt strangely lighter, as if sharing the physical evidence of her ordeal had somehow diminished its power over her. "Thank you," she said to Blake as they walked toward the town's small hotel. "For being there." Blake's eyes met hers, full of an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You're the brave one here, Rebecca. I'm just along for the ride." The Pine Tree Junction Hotel was modest but clean, with a small restaurant attached. Blake secured 2 rooms adjacent but separate and suggested they have an early supper before retiring. Over a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they discussed the next steps in their plan. Blake explained how his lawyer friend would use the photographs along with Rebecca's sworn statement to petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. "It won't be quick," he warned, "and your husband will be notified of the proceedings eventually." Rebecca nodded, breaking a piece of bread. "By then, I hope to be established somewhere new. Somewhere he won't find me easily." Blake studied her across the table. "You're handling all of this remarkably well." "Am I?" Rebecca gave a small, rueful smile. "Sometimes I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water." "That's still swimming," Blake pointed out. "Many would have drowned by now." The quiet confidence in his assessment warmed Rebecca. "I had help," she reminded him. "I still do." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how their lives had become intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. Blake was the first to look away, clearing his throat slightly. "We should turn in early," he suggested. "It's a long ride back tomorrow." Outside their rooms, they paused awkwardly in the narrow hallway. "Thank you again, Blake," Rebecca said softly, "for everything today." Blake's expression softened. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Rebecca." "Perhaps not, but I want to." She hesitated, then, acting on impulse, rose on tiptoe to press a light kiss to his weathered cheek. "Good night." Before he could respond, she slipped into her room, closing the door behind her. Her heart was pounding as if she'd run a mile, and her lips tingled from the brief contact with his skin. It had been a gesture of gratitude, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. But as she prepared for bed in the small, unfamiliar room, Rebecca couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Her feelings for Blake Callahan had grown far beyond gratitude. In the span of a week, this quiet, honorable cowboy had become important to her in ways she hadn't thought possible again. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She was still married, still in danger, still trying to rebuild a shattered life. Romantic feelings were a complication she couldn't afford, especially for the man who had risked so much to help her. Rebecca blew out her lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the muffled sounds of the small hotel settling for the night. Tomorrow they would collect the photographs, ride back to the ranch, and continue down the path toward her freedom. One step at a time, she reminded herself. That was all she could manage for now. But as sleep finally claimed her, Rebecca's last thoughts were of Blake's blue eyes and the feeling of his steady presence beside her, a beacon of safety in a world that had proven all too dangerous. The return journey to the ranch the next day was tense with unspoken emotions. They had collected the photographs from Mr. Simmons discreetly packaged in a plain envelope, and Blake had posted a letter to his lawyer friend in Denver, setting their plan in motion. Now, as they rode across the open Wyoming landscape, Rebecca sensed a new guardedness in Blake's manner, as if he too was processing the shift in their relationship that her impulsive goodnight kiss had signaled. They stopped to rest the horses near a small stream around midday. As Rebecca stretched her legs, walking along the bank to ease the stiffness from hours in the saddle, Blake approached with a canteen. "Water," he offered, his expression carefully neutral. Rebecca accepted it with a murmured thanks, taking a long drink before handing it back. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt a now familiar flutter in her chest at the contact. "Blake," she began, deciding that directness was best. "About last night, you don't need to explain," he interrupted, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon rather than her face. It was a difficult day. Emotions were running high. Rebecca studied his profile, wondering what lay behind his careful words. "That's true," she acknowledged. "But it doesn't make what I felt any less real." Now he did look at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Rebecca, you're in a vulnerable position. You've been through hell, and I'm just the person who happened to be there." The implication stung more than she expected. "Is that what you think? That I'm confused? Mistaking gratitude for something else?" Blake sighed, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of agitation. "I think we both need to be careful. Your situation is complicated enough without adding more complications." Rebecca felt a flare of frustration. "Don't you think I know that? I'm not some naive girl, Blake. I understand exactly how precarious my position is." "Then you understand why we need to focus on getting you legally free and safely settled somewhere new," Blake replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Everything else is a distraction we can't afford right now." Though his words made logical sense, Rebecca couldn't help feeling as if she'd been gently but definitively put in her place. She nodded stiffly and turned back toward the horses. "We should keep moving if we want to reach the ranch before dark." The remainder of the journey passed in relative silence, with conversation limited to practical matters. By the time the ranch came into view in the late afternoon, Rebecca had composed herself, pushing her hurt feelings aside in favor of the larger goal, her freedom from David. As they approached the ranch, however, something seemed off. Blake tensed beside her, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Something's wrong," he murmured, eyes scanning the property. "Too quiet." Rebecca followed his gaze and realized what was missing. There was no sign of the ranch hands. No smoke from the cabin chimney despite the cooling evening air. No horses visible in the corral where there should have been several. "Stay behind me," Blake instructed, his voice low and serious as they approached cautiously. They were about 50 yards from the cabin when the door opened and a figure stepped onto the porch. Even at this distance, Rebecca recognized him instantly, her blood turning to ice in her veins. "David." Well, her husband called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Look who finally decided to come home." Blake's hand moved to block Rebecca from riding forward. "Stay back," he warned quietly. "Be ready to run if I tell you." David descended the porch steps, and as he did, 2 more men emerged from the barn, strangers with hard faces and guns visible at their hips. Of Blake's ranch hands, there was no sign. "Where are my men?" Blake demanded as they drew closer, his voice controlled despite the tension evident in every line of his body. David smirked. "Your cowboys? They're fine. Tied up in the bunkhouse. Seems they weren't expecting visitors." Relief that his men weren't hurt flashed briefly across Blake's face before his expression hardened again. "What do you want, Miller?" "I think that's obvious," David replied, his gaze shifting to Rebecca. "I've come for my wife." Rebecca's hands tightened on her reins, fear and anger warring within her. "I'm not going anywhere with you, David." Her husband's face darkened. "That's not your decision to make, Rebecca. You're my wife, and you're coming home where you belong." Blake straightened in his saddle. "The lady has made her choice clear. I suggest you and your friends leave my property. Now." David laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "Or what, cowboy? There are 3 of us and 1 of you. Not counting my disobedient wife, of course." As if to emphasize his point, the 2 men from the barn moved to flank him, their hands resting on their weapons. The message was clear. They were prepared for violence if necessary. Blake remained outwardly calm, but Rebecca could sense the calculations running behind his steady gaze. "This doesn't have to end badly, Miller. Go back to Cottonwood Springs. A divorce petition has already been filed. Soon enough, Rebecca won't be your wife anymore, and you can get on with your life." David's face contorted with rage. "Divorce? You think I'll let her divorce me? Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation in town?" "Probably less damage than being known as a wife beater," Blake replied evenly, the accusation hanging in the air between them. For a moment, it seemed as if David might launch himself at Blake right there. Instead, he visibly reined in his temper, a cold smile replacing his anger. "You've got it all wrong, cowboy. I've never raised a hand to my wife. Rebecca's always been clumsy, always falling or walking into things. Isn't that right, dear?" The familiar lie, the one David had used to explain away her bruises to concerned neighbors, made Rebecca's stomach turn. No more lies, David. Everyone knows the truth now. The truth. David sneered. The truth is you're my lawful wife, and this man has kidnapped you. That's how the law will see it, no matter what wild stories you tell. Rebecca felt a surge of defiance. It's not kidnapping when someone escapes a prison. That's what our marriage was, a prison where you were both jailer and tormentor. David's face darkened dangerously. You ungrateful. Enough, Blake cut in, his voice like steel. This is going nowhere. Miller, I'm asking you one more time to leave peacefully. One of David's companions shifted impatiently. We ain't got time for this, Miller. Just grab the woman and let's go. The tension in the air was palpable as David considered his options. Then, with a deliberate casualness that was more frightening than his anger had been, he stepped back. All right, Callahan. We'll do this your way. For now. His eyes shifted to Rebecca, cold and calculating. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Blake didn't relax his vigilance. Your horses are by the corral. Take them and go. David held Blake's gaze for a long moment before nodding to his companions. As they moved toward their horses, he called back over his shoulder. You should watch your back, cowboy. Wyoming's a dangerous place. Accidents happen all the time. The threat hung in the air as the three men mounted and rode away. David's final glare at Rebecca promising that this confrontation was merely postponed, not avoided. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Blake turn to Rebecca. Are you all right? She realized she was trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her shaky. Yes. No. I don't know. She took a deep breath. We need to check on your men. Blake nodded, his own concern evident as they rode quickly to the bunkhouse. Inside, they found Tom, Jesse, and Hank bound and gagged but otherwise unharmed. Blake quickly cut them free while Rebecca fetched water. They jumped us this morning, Tom explained, rubbing his wrists where the ropes had chafed. Came out of nowhere while we were doing chores. Professional gunmen, by the look of them. Miller hired them in town, Hank added. Overheard them talking. They were planning to wait for you to return, then take Mrs. Taylor by force. Blake's expression was grim. They'll be back. Miller's not the type to give up easily. Jesse, the youngest of the hands, looked worriedly at Rebecca. What are we going to do, boss? Blake was silent for a moment, his thoughts clearly racing. We need to get Rebecca somewhere safer than the ranch. Somewhere Miller won't think to look. Denver, Rebecca suggested, thinking of the lawyer Blake had written to. Blake shook his head. Too obvious. Miller knows I have connections there. He turned to Tom. What about your brother's place near the Montana border? The older cowboy nodded slowly. Jim's got a small spread up there. Remote. Not many neighbors to ask questions. He'd help if I asked. How soon can we leave? Blake asked, decision made. First light, Tom replied. I can have a message sent to Jim from Pine Tree Junction. As the men discussed logistics, Rebecca felt a curious mixture of fear and determination. Once again, she was being forced to flee, to start over somewhere new. But this time was different. This time she wasn't running alone or in blind panic. When the plans were settled and they returned to the cabin, Rebecca found herself alone with Blake for the first time since David's appearance. In the kitchen, as Blake checked his revolver by lamplight, she finally gave voice to the question that had been haunting her. Why are you doing all this? She asked softly. You've already risked so much. Now you're uprooting your life to help me again. Blake looked up, his blue eyes serious in the golden light. Would you believe me if I said it was because it's the right thing to do? I would, Rebecca replied. But I think there's more to it than that. Blake set the gun down carefully and turned to face her fully. Earlier today, I told you we shouldn't complicate things between us. I still believe that's true at least until you're free and safe. He paused, choosing his words with care. But I won't deny that I care what happens to you, Rebecca, more than I probably should. The admission, modest as it was, made Rebecca's heart beat faster. I care about you too, Blake, more than I ever expected to. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then let's focus on getting you safe and legally free. After that, he let the sentence hang unfinished, a promise of possibilities to come. Rebecca nodded, understanding the wisdom in his restraint even as her heart yearned for more. After that, she agreed, the two simple words carrying the weight of a covenant between them. In the pale light of dawn, they set out Blake, Rebecca, and Tom riding north toward the Montana border, while Jesse and Hank remained behind to maintain the appearance of normal operations at the ranch and potentially mislead David if he returned. As they rode away from the place that had briefly become a sanctuary, Rebecca cast one last look over her shoulder at the cabin silhouetted against the rising sun. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time since fleeing from David, she felt something beyond fear and uncertainty. She felt hope. The journey to Tom's brother's ranch near the Montana border took 3 days of hard riding. They traveled from dawn until dusk, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or catch a few hours of sleep. Tom led the way, his knowledge of the territory proving invaluable as they avoided main trails and settlements where David and his hired men might be watching. For Rebecca, the physical demands of the journey were challenging but strangely freeing. Each mile put more distance between her and her past, each night under the vast Wyoming sky strengthening her resolve to create a new future for herself. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp in a sheltered grove beside a small creek, Rebecca found herself watching Blake as he tended the horses. The firelight caught the planes of his face, highlighting the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "He's a good man," Tom said quietly, settling beside her with a cup of coffee. The older cowboy had been mostly silent during their journey, but his eyes missed little. Rebecca nodded. "The best I've known." Tom studied her over the rim of his cup. "Known him for going on 8 years now. Never seen him take to anyone the way he has to you." "What do you mean?" Rebecca asked, though a part of her already knew. Tom's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Blake Callahan keeps his own counsel, always has. Runs his ranch, deals fair with his men, helps his neighbors when needed. But he keeps folks at a distance. Has ever since his sister died." Rebecca's gaze returned to Blake, remembering what he had told her about his sister's fate. "He blamed himself, didn't he?" "Reckon so," Tom confirmed. "He was away when it happened. By the time he got back, it was too late. Isabel was already gone, and her husband had disappeared. Blake tracked him for months, but never found him." The story filled in pieces of Blake that Rebecca had sensed but not fully understood: his immediate willingness to help her, his understanding of the danger David posed, his reluctance to act on the growing feelings between them. "He's afraid of failing again," she murmured, more to herself than to Tom. The old cowboy nodded. "Might be, but I've never seen him back down from doing what's right, no matter the risk." He finished his coffee and stood. "Just thought you should know what kind of man you're dealing with." As Tom moved away to check their perimeter before turning in, Blake approached the fire, taking the spot the older man had vacated. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing Rebecca's thoughtful expression. She smiled softly. "Yes, just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time." Blake nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "Tom says we should reach his brother's place by tomorrow evening. You'll be safe there while the divorce proceedings move forward." "And you?" Rebecca asked, the question that had been growing in her mind finally finding voice. "Will you go back to your ranch?" Blake was silent for a moment, his eyes on the dancing flames. "Eventually. There are things I need to take care of first." "David," Rebecca said, understanding immediately. "Yes." Blake's expression hardened. "He's made it clear he won't give up easily. As long as he's looking for you, you won't be truly safe." Fear and concern mingled in Rebecca's chest. "What are you planning to do?" "Nothing foolish," Blake assured her, correctly reading her worry. "But he needs to understand that his pursuit of you is over, one way or another." Rebecca reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "Please be careful. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Blake covered her hand with his own, the touch sending warmth through her despite the cool evening air. "I've faced worse than David Miller and his hired guns." His voice softened. "But I appreciate your concern." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Blake finally spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "When this is over, when you're legally free and David is no longer a threat, what will you do?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. She had been so focused on escaping her immediate danger that she had given little thought to what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "Start fresh somewhere, I suppose. Find work, build a new life." "Where?" Blake pressed gently. Rebecca looked up at him, the unspoken question hanging between them. "I haven't decided yet." I suppose it depends on various factors. Blake's eyes held hers, the firelight reflecting in their blue depths. Rebecca, I want you to know that whatever you decide, whatever path you choose, you'll have my support. The careful wording told Rebecca that he was still holding himself in check, still maintaining the boundary he felt was necessary until her situation was resolved. Yet beneath his measured words, she sensed deeper emotions: hope, longing, and perhaps a fear of his own. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than I can say. The moment was interrupted by Tom's return to the camp. We should get some rest, the older cowboy advised. Long day ahead tomorrow. As they prepared for sleep, Rebecca's thoughts remained on Blake's question and what it might mean for her future. For so long, her choices had been limited or made for her first by circumstance after her parents' death, then by David's increasing control. Now, despite the dangers still pursuing her, she faced the prospect of true freedom for the first time in years. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Where would she go? What would she do? And most importantly, what role would Blake Callahan play in that future? These questions followed her into sleep, where her dreams were a confusing mixture of pursuit and promise, danger and hope. Jim Wilson's ranch was smaller than Blake's, nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills near the Montana border. The main house was a simple log structure with a stone chimney, smoke curling invitingly from it as they approached in the fading light of their third day of travel. Tom's brother proved to be cut from the same quiet, capable cloth as Tom himself, a lean, gray-haired man with shrewd eyes and a firm handshake. He welcomed them without prying questions, showing Rebecca to a small but comfortable bedroom that had belonged to his daughter before she married and moved to Billings. You're welcome to stay as long as needed, Jim told Rebecca as he showed her where fresh water and towels were kept. Any friend of Tom's and Blake's is a friend of mine. Rebecca thanked him, touched by the straightforward hospitality. After days on the trail, the prospect of a real bed, clean clothes, and privacy was almost overwhelming. Once she had washed away the dust of travel and changed into a fresh dress, Rebecca joined the men in the main room, where Jim's wife, Martha, was serving a hearty supper. The older woman had the same no-nonsense manner as her husband, but with a maternal warmth that immediately put Rebecca at ease. Over the meal, Blake explained the situation to Jim and Martha in broad strokes: that Rebecca was seeking a divorce from an abusive husband who was unwilling to let her go. He didn't mention the confrontation at his ranch or the continuing danger, but from the knowing looks exchanged between the brothers, Rebecca suspected Tom had already filled Jim in on those details. Well, you'll be safe here, Martha declared, passing Rebecca a basket of fresh bread. We don't get many visitors this far out, and those we do get are friends, not strangers asking questions. I can't thank you enough, Rebecca said, the simple kindness of these people bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. Jim waved away her thanks. No need for that. We look after our own out here. The casual inclusion being counted among their own warmed Rebecca deeply. For the first time since fleeing David, she felt truly sheltered, not just physically but emotionally as well. After supper, while Martha showed Rebecca more of the house, the men gathered on the porch to smoke and discuss matters more directly. Through the window, Rebecca could see their serious expressions as Blake and Tom presumably filled Jim in on the full extent of the situation. Later, as the household prepared for bed, Blake found a moment to speak privately with Rebecca in the small sitting room. I'll be leaving at first light, he told her, his voice low to avoid being overheard. Tom will stay here with you for a while, just as an extra precaution. Rebecca felt a pang of alarm. You're going back to face David. It wasn't a question, but Blake nodded anyway. Someone has to end this. You can't live your life looking over your shoulder. Blake, please, Rebecca began, reaching for his arm. He's dangerous. Those men with him, I know exactly what they are. Blake interrupted gently. And I know how to handle men like that. His expression softened at her obvious concern. I'm not going to do anything foolish, Rebecca. I promise you that. Then what are you going to do? Blake hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. I have some friends in Cheyenne, former lawmen, who owe me favors. With their help, I'm going to make sure David understands that continuing to pursue you will cost him far more than letting you go. The measured way he spoke told Rebecca that he had given this careful thought, that this wasn't a rash decision made in anger, but a calculated plan to ensure her safety. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, resignation replacing her initial alarm. "A week, maybe 2, Blake replied. "By then, my lawyer friend in Denver should have the preliminary divorce papers filed. Once that process is underway, David will have legal notice that your marriage is ending, whether he likes it or not." Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding the logic, but still fearful for Blake's safety. "Just come back, please." The simple plea seemed to touch something deep in Blake. His eyes softened, and for a moment, his careful reserve slipped. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I will," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You have my word." The touch, brief as it was, sent warmth cascading through Rebecca. Without thinking, she leaned forward, her hand coming up to rest against his chest as their faces drew closer. For one breathless moment, it seemed as if Blake would finally bridge the careful distance he had maintained between them. But then, with visible effort, he stepped back, his hand falling away from her face. "When I return," he said softly, the words both a promise and a gentle rejection. "When you're truly free and safe, then we can talk about possibilities." Though disappointed, Rebecca understood and respected his restraint. "I'll hold you to that, Blake Callahan." A smile touched his lips, warming his eyes. "I'm counting on it, Rebecca Taylor." The use of her assumed name was a reminder of all that still stood between them: her marriage, David's threat, the uncertain future. But in Blake's eyes, she saw a promise that transcended those obstacles, a commitment to possibilities that neither of them could yet define, but both increasingly desired. As they said goodnight, and Rebecca retreated to her borrowed bedroom, she found herself praying for Blake's safe return and the future that might await them when this ordeal was finally over. The days after Blake's departure stretched into a week, then 2, time crawling with agonizing slowness for Rebecca. Despite the Wilsons' genuine hospitality and Tom's reassuring presence, she found herself watching the horizon constantly, hoping for the sight of a lone rider returning with news. To keep herself from dwelling on worries she could do nothing about, Rebecca threw herself into helping Martha around the ranch. She learned to make soap from scratch, to preserve the summer vegetables from the garden, to bake bread in the wood-fired oven. The physical work was a welcome distraction, and Martha's no-nonsense teaching style reminded Rebecca of her own mother. "You've got good hands," Martha commented one afternoon as they kneaded dough side by side. "Quick to learn, steady with the work." Rebecca smiled at the compliment. "My mother taught me the basics before she passed, but there's so much I never learned." "Well, you're making up for lost time now," Martha observed. "Might come in handy, wherever you end up settling." The casual reference to Rebecca's uncertain future brought a shadow to her expression that the older woman didn't miss. "You're thinking about him again," Martha said, her directness softened by genuine concern. Rebecca didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Is it that obvious?" Martha's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Only to anyone with eyes. You light up when his name is mentioned, then worry yourself sick the next minute." Heat rose in Rebecca's cheeks. "It's complicated." "Life usually is," Martha agreed, dividing the dough into loaves with practiced movements. "But some things are simpler than we make them out to be." Rebecca paused in her work. "What do you mean?" Martha regarded her thoughtfully. "Jim and I have known Blake Callahan for years. Good man, solid as they come. But lonely. Has been ever since his sister died." She patted a loaf into shape. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The simple observation made Rebecca's heart beat faster. "He's been very kind." "It's more than kindness, child, and you know it." Martha's tone was matter of fact. "Question is, what do you plan to do about it when he returns?" Rebecca stared down at the dough in her hands, considering the question. "I don't know. There's still so much uncertainty. My divorce, David's threats." "There's always uncertainty," Martha pointed out. "Jim asked me to marry him 2 days after we met. I said yes a week later. 50 years ago now, and I've never regretted it, despite all the hardships." The comparison startled Rebecca. "That's different. You weren't running from an abusive husband." "No," Martha agreed. "But I was running from a father who drank away our farm and beat my mother. I know something about wanting a fresh start." She placed the shaped loaves on a cloth to rise. Sometimes you have to take a chance on happiness when it presents itself, no matter how imperfect the timing. The wisdom in the older woman's words resonated with Rebecca. Since meeting Blake, she had been so focused on escaping her past that she had been hesitant to fully embrace the possibility of a future with him. Yet with each passing day, that possibility had grown more precious to her. "I care for him deeply," Rebecca admitted, the words feeling like a weight lifting from her chest. "More than I thought possible after everything with David." Martha nodded approvingly. "That's a good start. The rest will sort itself out when the time comes." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Now, let's get these loaves rising and see about dinner. Menfolk will be hungry when they come in from the fields." As they continued their work, Rebecca found herself contemplating Martha's advice and the future that might await her when Blake returned. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine not just freedom from David, but a new life with someone who truly valued her. The possibility gave her renewed strength as the days continued to pass with no word from Blake. It was nearly 3 weeks after Blake's departure when Tom rode into the ranch yard at a gallop, his expression urgent as he dismounted. "Rider coming," he announced to Rebecca and Martha, who had been hanging laundry. "Single man, looks to be in a hurry." Rebecca's heart leaped. "Blake?" Tom shook his head. "Can't tell from this distance. But whoever it is, they're pushing their horse hard." Jim emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. "Martha, take Rebecca inside. Tom and I will see who our visitor is." As Martha ushered her toward the house, Rebecca resisted. "Wait. I want to see. Better safe than sorry," Martha cut in firmly. "If it's Blake, you'll know soon enough. If it's not." She left the implication hanging, but Rebecca understood. Despite all precautions, there was still a chance that David had somehow tracked her to this remote ranch. Reluctantly, Rebecca allowed herself to be led inside, though she positioned herself by the window where she could watch the approaching rider. As the figure drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. Even at a distance, there was something familiar about the way the man sat his horse. "It's Blake," she whispered, relief washing through her like a physical force. Martha peered over her shoulder. "You're right. And in one piece, by the look of him." Rebecca was moving before she even realized it, rushing out the door despite Martha's call to wait. She ran across the yard just as Blake dismounted, his tired horse blowing hard from the fast ride. He looked up at her approach, and the smile that transformed his weary face sent her heart soaring. "Rebecca." She stopped a few feet away, suddenly conscious of Tom and Jim watching. "You're back." Blake handed his reins to Tom with a nod of thanks. "I promised I would be." There was so much Rebecca wanted to say, so many questions she wanted to ask, but not here, not with an audience. Blake seemed to understand, for he turned to Jim. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately? I have news." Jim nodded toward the house. "Use the study. Martha and I will see to your horse and give you some time." Inside the small room that served as Jim's office, Blake closed the door and turned to Rebecca. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, taking in the changes that 3 weeks had wrought. Blake appeared leaner, with new lines of fatigue around his eyes, but there was a settled look about him that suggested resolution. "You look well," he said softly, his gaze taking in her healthy color and the new confidence in her posture. "The Wilsons have been good for you." "They've been very kind," Rebecca agreed. "But I've been worried about you. No word for so long." "I'm sorry for that," Blake said, genuine regret in his voice. "It took longer than I expected to resolve things." Rebecca's breath caught. "David?" Blake nodded, moving to sit in one of the chairs by the small desk, gesturing for Rebecca to take the other. "It's over, Rebecca. He won't be coming after you again." The simple statement sent a wave of disbelieving relief through her. "How? What happened?" Blake leaned forward, his expression serious. "I went to Cheyenne first, as I planned. Met with some former lawmen I trust. Together, we gathered evidence of David's activities, not just his treatment of you, but some questionable business dealings we uncovered." Rebecca listened intently as Blake explained how they had discovered that David had been skimming money from his business partners, using threats and intimidation to keep them quiet. "We took what we found to the territorial marshal," Blake continued, "along with statements about his abuse of you. Between the two, there was enough to arrest him." "He's in jail?" Rebecca asked, hardly daring to believe it could be so simple. Blake nodded, facing multiple charges. His hired gun scattered once they realized the law was involved. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. And there's more. I stopped in Denver on my way back. The divorce proceedings are officially underway. These are copies of the papers that have been filed. Rebecca took the envelope with trembling hands. It's really happening? It is, Blake confirmed. My lawyer friend says that given the evidence in David's current legal troubles, the divorce should be granted without difficulty. You'll be legally free within a few months. The tears Rebecca had been holding back spilled over. I don't know what to say, how to thank you. Blake reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. You don't need to thank me. Seeing you safe and free is enough. Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, then back up to Blake's face. What happens now? The question hung between them, weighted with all the unspoken possibilities that had grown during their separation. Blake's thumb traced a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. That depends on you, Rebecca. You have choices now. Real ones. What about you? She asked, her heart pounding. What do you want? For the first time since she had known him, Blake seemed uncertain, vulnerable. I want. He paused, gathering his courage. I want you to be happy, and I hope that your happiness might include me. The simple admission, delivered with such honest emotion, broke the last of Rebecca's hesitation. It does, she whispered. It has almost from the beginning, though I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. Blake's eyes searched hers, hope warring with caution. You've been through so much. I wouldn't want to rush you into anything. Rebecca smiled through her tears. Martha told me something wise while you were gone. She said sometimes you have to take a chance on happiness when it presents itself, no matter how imperfect the timing. A slow smile spread across Blake's face. Martha Wilson is a smart woman. She is, Rebecca agreed. And I think she's right. She took a deep breath. I care for you, Blake. More than I thought possible after everything that happened with David. When this divorce is final, when I'm truly free, I want to explore what's between us. If you want that too. Blake's hand tightened on hers. I want that more than anything, Rebecca. The admission seemed to release something in him, for he continued with growing confidence. These past weeks, writing back to you, all I could think about was the future, our future, if you'd have me. The sincerity in his voice, the open longing in his eyes, made Rebecca's heart swell. This was nothing like David's calculated charm. This was honest emotion from a man who had proven his character through actions, not words. I would have you, she said softly. When the time is right. Blake stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. His embrace was warm and solid, a promise of safety and belonging that Rebecca had never truly known before. When the time is right, he agreed, his breath warm against her hair. And until then, I'll be right here, waiting. Rebecca looked up at him, her heart full. Blake Callahan, I believe that's the sweetest promise anyone has ever made to me. His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made her want to trace the lines with her fingertips. I aim to keep it, Rebecca Taylor. That and every other promise I make to you from this day forward. In that moment, with the afternoon sun streaming through the study window and Blake's arms around her, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that her life had irrevocably changed. The path ahead might still hold challenges, but she would face them with Blake beside her, their shared strength greater than any obstacle. For the first time since she had fled from David that desperate night in Cottonwood Springs, Rebecca felt not just safe, but truly free to hope, free to dream, and free to love the man who had risked everything to save her. The autumn months passed in a gentle rhythm at Jim Wilson's ranch. With Blake's return and the knowledge that David was no longer a threat, Rebecca blossomed. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long gradually faded, replaced by a growing confidence and peace. Blake remained at the ranch, sending Tom back to oversee his own property with promises to return by spring. Though he maintained a respectful distance until Rebecca's divorce was final, their relationship deepened daily through shared work, long conversations, and quiet evenings by the fire. Jim and Martha watched with approving eyes as the bond between Blake and Rebecca strengthened, offering quiet support and occasional gentle teasing that made Rebecca blush and Blake duck his head with a rare, boyish smile. In early December, as the first heavy snows blanketed the hills surrounding the valley, a rider arrived with mail from town. Among the letters was one bearing the Denver lawyer's seal. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened it, Blake standing supportively at her side. "It's done," she whispered, scanning the formal language. "The divorce has been granted. I'm free." The news spread quickly through the small household, bringing congratulations and, from Martha, a special dinner to celebrate. That evening, after the meal was cleared away and Jim and Martha had tactfully retired early, Blake took Rebecca's hand and led her to the porch. Despite the cold, the night was beautiful, crystal clear, with stars blazing overhead and moonlight turning the snow-covered landscape to silver. Blake had thoughtfully brought a heavy blanket, which he wrapped around Rebecca's shoulders as they stood looking out at the peaceful scene. "Happy?" he asked softly, his arm around her waist. Rebecca leaned into his warmth. "More than I ever thought possible, though it still doesn't seem quite real." "It's real," Blake assured her. "You're free, Rebecca. Legally, completely free." The confirmation sent a thrill through her. "Free to decide my own future." Blake turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "About that future." He hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. "I've been waiting for this day, for the right time to ask you something important." Rebecca's heart quickened as Blake took both her hands in his. "What is it?" "I love you," he said simply, the words hanging in the frosty air between them. "I think I've loved you since that first night in the stable, when you stood up to your husband despite your fear. You're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known, and these past months have only made me more certain that I want to spend my life with you." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as Blake continued, his voice growing more confident with each word. "I know it might seem too soon after everything you've been through, and if you need more time, I'll wait as long as necessary. But I wanted you to know, now that you're truly free to choose, that I'm offering you my heart, my home, and my name if you want them." The proposal, delivered with such earnest sincerity, touched Rebecca deeply. This was nothing like David's flashy courtship with its hidden agenda and false promises. This was Blake honest, steadfast, and true, offering a love based on genuine respect and shared experience. "Blake Callahan," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I would be honored to share your name, your home, and your life." She reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the strong lines she had come to love. "I love you too, more than I have words to express." The joy that transformed Blake's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He gathered her close, and for the first time, their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender at first, then deepening as months of restrained longing finally found expression. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again. After Isabel died, I closed myself off, focused on the ranch, convinced myself it was enough. And now," Rebecca prompted gently. "Now I know it wasn't," Blake admitted. "You've brought something back to life in me, Rebecca. Something I thought was gone forever." Rebecca smiled, her heart full to bursting. "You did the same for me. You saved me in more ways than you know." Blake kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. "When would you like to be married?" "Spring, when the snow melts and the wildflowers bloom." Rebecca considered this, then shook her head. "I don't want to wait that long. Unless you think we should." A slow smile spread across Blake's face. "Truth be told, neither do I. What did you have in mind?" "Christmas," Rebecca suggested. "It's only a few weeks away. Simple, here with the Wilsons as our witnesses. Then we can travel to your ranch when the weather allows and start our life together." "Christmas it is," Blake agreed, his eyes shining with happiness. A new beginning at the closing of the year. As they stood together in the moonlight, wrapped in the blanket and each other's arms, Rebecca marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror and desperation to love and hope, from a prison of abuse to the freedom of Blake's unconditional love. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled up at him. "I was thinking about promises. About the night you found me in Cottonwood Springs, when you promised I'd never have to run again." Blake's arms tightened around her. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You have a home with me, Rebecca. Always." "I know," she whispered, stretching up to kiss him again. And that's the most beautiful promise anyone has ever made to me. As their lips met once more, sealing their engagement beneath the winter stars, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that this promise, unlike so many others in her life, would be kept. With Blake, she had found not just safety, but belonging. Not just protection, but partnership. Not just escape from her past, but hope for her future. And in the circle of his arms, Rebecca Taylor, soon to be Rebecca Callahan, had finally found the one thing she had been seeking all along. A place where she never had to run again. True to their plans, Rebecca and Blake were married on Christmas Day, 1876, in the Wilsons' cozy main room, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the occasion. Martha had helped Rebecca fashion a simple but elegant wedding dress from cream-colored fabric ordered from the nearest town, while Blake wore his best shirt and a new vest that Jim insisted on giving him as a wedding present. The ceremony was performed by a traveling preacher who had been persuaded to make the journey to the remote ranch despite the winter weather. Tom had returned from Blake's ranch for the occasion, bringing with him news that all was well there, and a beautiful handcrafted wooden box as a wedding gift, his own work. He explained gruffly, something to keep special mementos in. As Rebecca and Blake exchanged their vows before their small circle of friends, the love between them was palpable, warming the room more effectively than the blazing fire in the hearth. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Blake kissed his bride with tender reverence, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Tom was seen discreetly wiping away a tear. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful, a feast prepared by Martha with Rebecca's help, music from Jim's old fiddle, and stories shared late into the evening. When the newlyweds finally retired to the small cabin that Jim had insisted they use for privacy, a wedding gift that had been prepared in secret, they did so amid good-natured teasing and heartfelt well wishes. Alone at last, Blake drew Rebecca into his arms, his expression one of wonder and deep contentment. "Mrs. Callahan," he murmured, trying out her new name. Rebecca smiled up at him, her heart full. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Blake tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Are you happy, Rebecca?" "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" Blake's answer was a kiss that expressed everything words could not: his love, his joy, his promise of a lifetime of devotion. As the kiss deepened, and they began to explore this new dimension of their relationship, Rebecca gave herself completely to the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Their wedding night was a revelation, tender, passionate, and healing. Where David had used her body as another possession to control, Blake treated her with reverence and care, ensuring her comfort and pleasure before his own. In his arms, Rebecca discovered the true meaning of intimacy, of two people becoming one in body and spirit. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the warm quilts, the winter night deep and silent around their shelter, Blake traced lazy patterns on Rebecca's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Rebecca smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest. "I was thinking about beginnings and endings. How ending my marriage to David led to beginning this new life with you. How sometimes what feels like the worst moment of your life can lead to the best." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life has a way of surprising us. When Isabel died, I thought I'd never know happiness again. I threw myself into the ranch, kept people at a distance." His arms tightened around Rebecca. "Then you appeared in my stable that night, defiant despite your fear, and something shifted inside me." "For me too," Rebecca admitted. "Even terrified as I was, there was something about you that made me trust you when I'd sworn never to trust a man again." "I'm glad you did," Blake said softly. "And I promise you, Rebecca, I will spend every day of our life together earning that trust." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Rebecca felt a sense of peace that went beyond mere contentment. This was where she belonged, with this good, honorable man who had risked everything to save her and then waited patiently until she was truly free to love him. Winter passed in a cocoon of newlywed bliss. Rebecca and Blake remained at the Wilson Ranch until the worst of the season was over, helping with chores and enjoying the simple pleasures of their new life together. Rebecca continued to learn from Martha, adding to her skills in cooking, preserving, and the countless other tasks required to run a successful ranch household. Blake, meanwhile, worked alongside Jim, the two men forming a deeper friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. In the evenings, the couples would gather in the main house, sharing meals and conversation, playing cards, or simply enjoying each other's company beside the fire. It was during one such evening in early March that Blake brought up the subject of returning to their own ranch. The passes should be clear enough to travel safely by the end of the month, he observed, looking to Jim for confirmation. It's time we stopped imposing on your hospitality and went home. You're hardly imposing, Martha protested. It's been a joy having you both here. And we've appreciated every moment, Rebecca assured her, having grown to love the older woman like a mother. But Blake is right. It's time we started our life together properly, in our own home. The thought of leaving the safety and comfort of the Wilson Ranch brought a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Rebecca had come to love this place that had sheltered her during her darkest times. Yet she was eager to see Blake's ranch again to make it truly theirs, to build their future together there. Will Tom and the other hands still be there? She asked Blake later, as they prepared for bed in their small cabin. Blake nodded, hanging his shirt on a peg. Tom's been overseeing things well. Jesse and Hank too. But they'll be glad to have us back. Especially you. He smiled. Tom wrote that they miss your cooking something fierce. Rebecca laughed, the sound still a delight to Blake's ears after all these months. I've been practicing new recipes with Martha. They won't know what hit them. Blake crossed to where she sat brushing her hair, taking the brush from her hands to continue the task himself. It had become a nightly ritual that they both cherished, this simple, intimate act of care. Are you nervous? He asked perceptively, reading the slight tension in her shoulders. About going back? Rebecca leaned into his touch. A little, she admitted. So much has happened since I was last there. I'm not the same person who arrived at your ranch that night. No, you're not. Blake agreed, his voice warm with pride. You're stronger now, more confident. He set the brush aside and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. But if you're not ready, Rebecca, we can stay longer. Or find somewhere new entirely, if that's what you want. The offer, made with such sincere concern for her feelings, touched Rebecca deeply. This was the difference between David and Blake in its essence. One had demanded, controlled, taken. The other asked, considered, gave. No, she said with growing certainty. I want to go home, Blake. To our home. To build our life there together. The smile that lit his face was worth any lingering apprehension. Our home, he repeated, savoring the words. I like the sound of that. As they prepared for the journey in the weeks that followed, Rebecca found herself increasingly excited about the future. The divorce papers were safely stored in Tom's wooden box along with her new marriage certificate, tangible proof of her transformation from Rebecca Miller, abused wife, to Rebecca Callahan, beloved partner. The day of departure arrived with clear skies and a hint of spring in the air. As Blake loaded their few possessions onto the wagon Jim had insisted they take, easier on a new bride than days in the saddle, he declared. Rebecca said her emotional goodbyes to Martha. You've taught me so much, she said, embracing the older woman tightly. I don't know how to thank you. Martha returned the hug with equal feeling. You already have, child. Seeing you and Blake so happy together is thanks enough. She pulled back, her eyes misty but her expression firm. Now you go and make that ranch a home. And don't be strangers, we expect visits. Count on it, Rebecca promised. And you must come to us too, when the weather's good. With final hugs and handshakes, promises to write, and more than a few tears, they set off, Rebecca beside Blake on the wagon seat, their future stretching before them like the open road. The journey took 4 days, Blake setting an easy pace and making camp each night in sheltered spots he knew well. On the evening of the 4th day, they crested a rise, and there below them lay Callahan Ranch, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Blake drew the wagon to a halt, giving Rebecca a moment to take in the view. Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan. Rebecca looked out over the property, the sturdy cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, the barn and corrals, the distant pastures where cattle grazed. In the months since she had fled there in terror, it had transformed in her mind from a temporary refuge to the promise of a permanent home. It's beautiful, she said softly, meaning far more than just the physical landscape. As they approached, Tom, Jesse, and Hank emerged from various buildings, alerted by the sound of the wagon. Their welcome was enthusiastic, with handshakes for Blake and careful, respectful embraces for Rebecca. "Place hasn't been the same without you, Mrs. Callahan," Jesse declared with his easy grin. "Especially the cooking." Rebecca laughed, the last of her apprehension melting away in the warmth of their welcome. "I hear you've been suffering terribly. Don't worry, I'll remedy that starting tomorrow." While the men unloaded the wagon, Rebecca entered the cabin that was now her home. She was surprised to find it had been thoroughly cleaned, with fresh curtains at the windows and a vase of early spring wildflowers on the table. "We wanted it nice for you," Hank explained gruffly when she thanked them. Mrs. Wilson sent instructions with Tom. That first evening in their home, after a celebratory dinner with the Hands, Rebecca and Blake finally found themselves alone. Standing in the main room of the cabin, Rebecca felt a surge of emotion as she looked around at what was now theirs together. "Happy?" Blake asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Rebecca leaned back against him, drawing strength and comfort from his solid presence. "Very. It feels right, being here with you." Blake pressed a kiss to her temple. "There's something I want to show you. A wedding gift I've been working on." Curious, Rebecca followed as he led her to what had been his bedroom, now theirs. Inside, she gasped in delight. The room had been transformed. The simple single bed was gone, replaced by a beautiful, handcrafted double bed with an intricately carved headboard. New curtains hung at the windows, and a colorful quilt, clearly Martha's work, adorned the bed. "Blake," she breathed, moving closer to examine the headboard's detailed carvings of wildflowers and mountains. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a hint of shyness in his expression. "During the winter, when you were helping Martha, Jim let me use his workshop." He ran a hand over the smooth wood. "I wanted you to have something special, something made just for you for us." Tears sprang to Rebecca's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful. Perfect." Blake's arms came around her again. "Not as beautiful as you." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not just in this cabin or on this ranch, but in Blake's heart. The seasons turned, and with them, Rebecca and Blake's life together deepened and flourished. Spring brought new calves to the ranch. Summer brought the hard work of haying and cattle drives. Autumn brought harvest and preparation for winter, and winter brought cozy evenings by the fire in their snug cabin. Through it all, their love grew stronger, tempered by the challenges and joys of ranch life. Rebecca proved herself an equal partner in their venture, learning the business side of ranching from Blake while transforming their cabin into a true home. The Hands, Tom, Jesse, and Hank, became like family, loyal not just to Blake, but to Rebecca as well, protective of the happiness their boss and his wife had found together. Word came occasionally from Cottonwood Springs. David Miller had been convicted of fraud and other charges, sentenced to years in the territorial prison. The news brought Rebecca a final sense of closure, confirmation that her past was truly behind her. In the spring of their second year of marriage, as wildflowers carpeted the hills surrounding the ranch, Rebecca shared joyful news with Blake. They were expecting a child come fall. His reaction, speechless wonder followed by tears of joy as he knelt to press a gentle kiss to her still flat stomach, was everything Rebecca could have hoped for. "I never thought I'd be a father," he admitted that night as they lay together, his hand protective over the new life growing within her. "After everything, it seemed like too much to hope for." Rebecca covered his hand with hers. "Hope is what brought us together. It seems fitting that it would bring us this gift as well." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Martha Wilson traveling to stay with them for the final months, her experience and practical knowledge a comfort to both Rebecca and Blake. When their daughter arrived on a crisp October day, they named her Isabella Hope Callahan, honoring Blake's sister while acknowledging the force that had guided their journey together. As Rebecca nursed their daughter before the fire on a winter evening, Blake watching them with quiet adoration, she reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her here. From a desperate flight into the night to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed almost too miraculous to comprehend. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled, stroking their daughter's downy head. "I was thinking about promises. About that night you found me and promised I'd never have to run again." Blake moved to join them, settling beside Rebecca on the sofa and gently touching Isabella's tiny hand. Best promise I ever made. And kept, Rebecca added softly. Every day we've been together, you've kept it. Blake's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her and their daughter closer. And I always will, Rebecca. As long as I live, you'll never have to run again. As the fire crackled and their daughter drifted to sleep in her arms, Rebecca leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the love and security she had once thought forever beyond her reach. Outside, snow fell softly on Callahan Ranch, blanketing their world in peaceful white, while inside, the family Blake and Rebecca had created together against all odds, despite all obstacles glowed with the warmth of hope fulfilled and promises kept. In the years that followed, that promise remained unbroken. Through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, Blake and Rebecca Callahan built a life together that stood as testament to the power of courage, compassion, and love to heal even the deepest wounds. And though the shadow of her past never completely disappeared, it faded more with each passing year. Outshone by the brightness of the future, they continued to build together a future where neither of them ever had to run again.